What began as Samuel Cooper's straightforward decision to rescue a well-dressed stranger from his snow-covered driveway would expose a national security secret that three intelligence agencies had spent decades hiding from public awareness. An historic winter blizzard that had stranded one executive's luxury vehicle now served as the unlikely backdrop for a presidential operation unlike anything the forgotten farming community of Millbrook Valley had ever encountered. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Samuel stood at his kitchen window, steaming coffee forgotten in his calloused hands, as he counted the 13th black SUV rolling through his gates. His modest family homestead, which his grandfather had established in the unforgiving Nebraska plains during the Dust Bowl era, now resembled a fortified command center rather than the struggling corn operation it had been just 12 hours earlier. "I don't understand any of this, Duke," he muttered to the aging German shepherd, pressing anxiously against his leg. The dog whined softly, mirroring his owner's growing unease as uniformed personnel established security checkpoints around the old guest house where last night's mysterious visitor now rested. The record-breaking winter storm that meteorologists had named Midnight Vortex had brought unprecedented snowfall and life-threatening temperatures to Millbrook County, stranding vehicles and overwhelming emergency services. Local authorities had issued mandatory emergency declarations, closing highways and instructing residents to remain indoors indefinitely. Samuel had spent the previous day securing his equipment and reinforcing his livestock shelters, preparing his remaining animals for the worst of the weather still to come. It was during his final check of the Eastern Access Road, where drifting snow often created impassable conditions, that he'd spotted the nearly buried luxury sedan. At first, Samuel assumed it was just another snowdrift forming unusual shapes in the fading light. Only when Duke began barking frantically and pawing at the snow did Samuel realize a vehicle was buried there, its hazard lights barely visible through the accumulating snow. Getting the stranded driver to safety had been arduous. The man, dressed in an expensive suit entirely unsuitable for the conditions, was semi-conscious and suffering from the early stages of hypothermia. Despite his lean build, he was surprisingly heavy to move through thigh-deep snow, and with temperatures plummeting to -30 with the wind chill, every moment of exposure felt like an eternity. Samuel had managed to half-carry, half-drag him to the guest house, where the emergency generator and wood stove provided life-saving warmth against the merciless cold. It wasn't the blizzard's severity that had triggered this extraordinary response. It was the identity and condition of the stranger Samuel had pulled from the snowbound luxury car just beyond his eastern property line. As Samuel had removed the man's frozen outer clothes, seeking to raise his core temperature, he discovered several unusual items that initially confused him but now seemed disturbingly significant given the government's overwhelming reaction. Samuel's weathered fingers unconsciously traced the outline of the peculiar ID card he'd found in the man's inner pocket, an identification with security features unlike any government ID he'd ever seen. The same credentials that had caused the first Secret Service agent to visibly tense when Samuel mentioned them during his dawn call to emergency services once the phones came back online. The executive's possessions had been minimal: a high-end smartphone with military-grade encryption, a briefcase with a sophisticated biometric lock that had remained firmly sealed despite the extreme cold, and a small metallic object that had immediately caught Samuel's attention. Roughly the size of a poker chip, but with an unusual weight and balance, its surface featured markings that reminded him of circuit patterns, yet it had no visible buttons or interface. Most strangely, despite being recovered from a frozen vehicle, it remained unnaturally warm to the touch. During those desperate hours, working to save the stranger's life, Samuel had noticed other peculiarities. The man's vital signs had stabilized with remarkable speed once inside the guest house. His body temperature, dangerously low when found, had normalized faster than Samuel's first aid training suggested was possible. When checking his pupils with a flashlight, Samuel could have sworn they reflected the light with an unusual clarity, almost as if they were enhanced somehow. Now that simple act of roadside assistance had escalated into something far beyond Samuel's comprehension. The convoy included vehicles bearing government seals he recognized and others with no markings at all. The personnel establishing positions around his property wore various uniforms, some Secret Service, others military, and still others in tactical gear without any identifying insignia. The sound of helicopter rotors grew louder overhead, adding to the surreal transformation of his isolated family farm. A sleek black helicopter bearing presidential markings settled onto his south field, the downdraft creating swirling vortices in the freshly fallen snow. From the aircraft emerged a tall woman in a tailored suit, her bearing unmistakably authoritative despite her civilian appearance. She strode purposefully toward the house, flanked by two suited agents whose eyes continuously scanned the surroundings, their hands never far from their concealed weapons. As she approached the porch, Samuel stepped outside, determined to get answers about why his act of basic human decency had apparently triggered a full-scale presidential security response. Duke remained at his side, his normally friendly temperament replaced with wary vigilance. "Mr. Cooper," the woman called as she reached the steps. "I'm Director Catherine Hayes, Executive Protection Division. Thank you for meeting me outside. It simplifies certain protocols." Samuel nodded cautiously, noting how her escorts positioned themselves to maintain clear sightlines across his property. "Doesn't seem like I had much choice, Director. Your people have surrounded my home." "Aye, precautionary measure, I assure you," she replied with practiced neutrality. "The situation requires certain security parameters that may seem excessive, but are entirely warranted given the circumstances." "And what situation would that be?" Samuel asked, his patience wearing thin. "I found a man half frozen in a snowdrift, and brought him inside instead of letting him freeze to death. Since when does helping someone warrant a presidential-level response?" Something flickered across Director Hayes's face, a momentary break in her professional mask that might have been respect or perhaps concern. "Mr. Cooper, the individual you rescued is not who you think," she said, her voice lowering slightly. "For your safety and national security, I need you to brief me on everything that occurred from the moment you found him until our arrival." "Not who I think," Samuel repeated, confusion mounting. "He's an executive who got caught in a blizzard. He was barely conscious when I found him, suffering from exposure. I brought him to my guest house because it was closer than the main house, got him warmed up, and called emergency services when the phones came back online after dawn." Director Hayes studied him carefully. "Did he speak to you at any point, share any information about himself or why he was in this area?" Samuel Cooper had always been a man defined by the land he tended. At 48, the lines etched into his sun-weathered face told the story of 2 decades spent battling the increasingly volatile Nebraska climate. His hands, calloused and strong, bore witness to the daily struggle of maintaining the Cooper family legacy. 300 acres of once prosperous farmland that had provided for 4 generations of Coopers since 1934. 3 days before the blizzard changed everything. Samuel had been in his workshop, repairing an irrigation pump that had frozen during the season's first cold snap. The radio forecaster warned of the approaching winter system, but Nebraska farmers were no strangers to harsh weather. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Samuel had simply adjusted his work schedule, prioritizing the tasks that couldn't wait, winterizing equipment, reinforcing the livestock shelters, and stockpiling enough feed to last through a prolonged storm. The Millbrook Valley had once been home to dozens of family farms like the Cooper place, but corporate agriculture had gradually consumed most of the surrounding properties over the past 30 years. Samuel's neighbors had sold their land one by one, unable to compete with industrial farming operations or unwilling to endure the increasingly extreme weather patterns that scientists attributed to climate change. Now, the Cooper farm stood as one of the last independent agricultural operations in the county, an island of tradition in a sea of corporate fields. Samuel hadn't always planned to be a farmer. After high school, he'd enlisted in the army, serving 8 years, including deployments to Afghanistan and Iraq. His specialized training in the Rangers had provided skills far beyond those required for agriculture. But when his father suffered a debilitating stroke 12 years ago, Samuel had returned to Millbrook without hesitation. The transition from elite soldier to struggling farmer hadn't been easy. But Samuel approached each challenge with the same methodical determination that had served him in combat. The farmhouse where Samuel now stood, watching the government vehicles arrive, had been built by his great-grandfather, Walter Cooper, who had fled the devastation of the Dust Bowl in Oklahoma to start anew in Nebraska. The 2-story white clapboard structure had been modernized over the decades, but its bones remained the same. Solid oak beams, harvested from the now-vanished woodlands that had once dotted the region. Foundation stones quarried from local limestone beds. Adjacent to the main house stood the guest cottage, originally built as temporary housing for seasonal workers during more prosperous times. In recent years, it had primarily served as storage until Samuel renovated it last summer, harboring a faint hope that his daughter Melissa might visit more often if she had her own space. A community college student in Lincoln, Melissa had been increasingly distant since her mother's death from cancer 3 years earlier, a loss that had left both of them adrift in their grief. Duke had been Samuel's constant companion since his return to civilian life. The German Shepherd, now 9 years old with grey frosting his muzzle, had been trained as a support animal to help Samuel manage the PTSD that occasionally still manifested after his military service. Duke's instincts remained sharp, despite his advancing age, his ability to sense Samuel's shifting moods, almost supernatural in its precision. Before the blizzard, Samuel's daily routine had been dictated by the rhythms of the farm and the seasons. Winter meant maintenance work, planning for spring planting, and tending to his reduced livestock holdings, 28 cattle, and a small flock of heritage chickens that provided eggs he sold at the weekly farmers' market in Prescott, the nearest town of any size, 18 miles away. Financial pressures had been mounting steadily for years. The mortgage on the property had ballooned when Samuel was forced to take out additional loans to cover medical expenses during his late wife, Karen's, illness. Crop insurance barely covered the losses from last summer's devastating drought, which had been immediately followed by early autumn flooding that damaged a significant portion of his corn harvest. The previous month, Samuel had received a letter from Midwest Agricultural Investments, the corporation that had acquired most of his neighbor's properties. Their offer to purchase the Cooper farm was substantial, enough to pay off his debts and provide a comfortable new start somewhere else. The letter remained unopened on his desk, a decision he wasn't yet ready to face. The evening before finding the stranded executive, Samuel had checked the National Weather Service updates on his laptop, noting with growing concern the rapidly intensifying storm system. What had initially been forecast as a significant but manageable winter storm had evolved into a potential record breaker, with predictions of 30 inches of snow and wind chills approaching 40 below zero. Samuel had made a final trip to town, filling extra gas cans for the generators and purchasing additional supplies, batteries, canned goods, medical essentials. The hardware store owner, Jim Halverson, one of the few remaining business people in Millbrook who remembered when the town had been a thriving agricultural community, had warned him to prepare for power outages lasting several days. "Haven't seen a system like this in 30 years, Sam," Jim had said as he helped load supplies into Samuel's truck. "Not since the great blizzard of '93. They're saying this could be worse." By the time Samuel returned to the farm, the leading edge of the storm had already arrived. Fat, lazy snowflakes that gradually increased in intensity as daylight faded. He'd spent the remaining hours before dark securing anything that might be damaged by high winds, checking the backup heating systems in the livestock shelter, and making sure the emergency generator was functioning properly. That night, as the wind howled around the eaves of the old farmhouse, Samuel had sat by the fireplace, with Duke stretched out nearby, reviewing seed catalogues for the spring planting that suddenly seemed impossibly distant. The electricity had flickered several times before, failing completely around 10 p.m., leaving him to rely on the generator for essential systems and the fireplace for additional warmth. Samuel had slept fitfully, waking often to the sounds of the intensifying storm. The wind screamed across the plains with a voice that seemed almost alive, rattling windows and finding every tiny gap in the old home's insulation. By dawn, the world outside had transformed entirely, familiar landmarks erased by mountainous snowdrifts that reached to the first-floor windowsills in places. The morning had been spent digging pathways to the outbuildings, checking on livestock, and assessing for damage. It was during his inspection of the eastern access road, which connected the Cooper property to County Highway 18, that Duke had alerted him to something buried in the snow, something that would shatter the isolated simplicity of his existence, and thrust him into a situation beyond anything his military training or farming experience had prepared him for. As Director Hayes waited for his response, Samuel realized the normalcy of his life, difficult and financially precarious as it had been, had vanished as completely as the landscape beneath the blizzard's shroud. Whatever came next would forever divide his life into before and after this moment. Samuel hesitated before answering Director Hayes's question, recalling the strange moments when the stranger had briefly regained consciousness during the night. He was delirious from the cold, Samuel explained, muttered some things that didn't make much sense, something about Protocol 7 and authorization needed. I figured it was just the hypothermia talking. He paused, remembering another detail. There was one other thing. He grabbed my arm at one point, looked right at me and said, "They can't be allowed to find it." Then he passed out again. The director's posture stiffened almost imperceptibly, and her eyes narrowed slightly. "And the object you mentioned to emergency dispatch? The metal item you found among his possessions. Did you handle it or activate it in any way?" A chill that had nothing to do with the winter air crept up Samuel's spine. It was warm, unnaturally warm, considering it had been in a frozen car for who knows how long, and there was a faint, vibration when I held it, almost too subtle to notice. He hesitated again. "Also, my cell phone and radio stopped working when I put it on the kitchen table. They started working again when I moved it to the bookshelf. What exactly is going on here, Director?" Instead of answering directly, Hayes handed him an official document, a non-disclosure agreement with severe federal penalties prominently displayed in the opening paragraph. "Before we proceed further, I need your signature acknowledging that everything from this point forward is classified at the highest level." Samuel stared at the document, the surreal quality of the morning intensifying. The simple act of helping a stranded traveler had somehow entangled him, in something significant enough to bring presidential security streaming to his isolated property within hours of his call to emergency services. As snowflakes began falling, again from the heavy grey sky, Samuel made a decision that would forever alter his understanding of the world and his place in it. He took the offered pen and signed, committing himself to whatever extraordinary revelation waited on the other side of his signature. "Now," he said, handing back the signed document, "tell me who I really rescued from that blizzard." "Director." Hayes gestured toward Samuel's front door. "We should continue this conversation inside, Mr. Cooper. Some matters are better discussed away from open spaces." Samuel raised an eyebrow. "Listening devices on my farm? We're 20 miles from the nearest town." "Distance is no longer the barrier to surveillance it once was," she replied cryptically, her eyes scanning the tree line beyond his property. "And given what I'm about to share with you, privacy is essential." Inside the farmhouse kitchen, Samuel's home felt suddenly unfamiliar with the director's presence. The worn wooden table where 3 generations of Coopers had taken their meals now served as an impromptu security briefing station as Hayes removed a slim tablet from her jacket. "What I'm authorized to tell you is limited," she began, activating the device, "but given your direct contact with the subject and the object, you're entitled to certain information for your own safety." The tablet projected a 3-dimensional holographic display above the kitchen table, technology far beyond anything Samuel had seen outside of military applications. The image showed a detailed personnel file with security clearances and authorization. The codes, alongside a photograph of the man Samuel had rescued. "The individual you found is Alexander Riker, Special Advisor to the President on matters of national security. Dr. Riker was en route to a classified facility approximately 60 miles north of here when his vehicle was disabled by the storm." Samuel studied the holographic display, taking in the extensive credentials and security clearances listed next to Riker's name. "Special Advisor? On what exactly?" Director Hayes manipulated the display, bringing up a new series of files. "Dr. Riker's specific portfolio is among the government's most closely guarded programs. What I can tell you is that he leads the Quantum Security Initiative, a multi-agency task force dealing with emerging threats to national infrastructure." "Emerging threats?" Samuel repeated. "You mean like cybersecurity?" "That's one small aspect," Hayes replied, her expression carefully neutral. "The QSI's primary focus extends to more fundamental vulnerabilities. Weaknesses in systems we've only recently discovered can be exploited." Samuel's military training helped him read between the lines. "You're talking about something new, something that has the government spooked enough to send a presidential advisor out during a record blizzard." Director Hayes studied him for a moment, apparently making a decision about how much to reveal. 3 weeks ago, there was an incident at a research facility in Colorado, a breakthrough that should have been impossible based on our current understanding of physics. The implications were significant enough that Dr. Riker was personally overseeing the secure transfer of research materials to a more protected installation. She manipulated the holographic display again, showing what appeared to be a laboratory explosion. 2 days. After this incident, the primary researcher was found dead under suspicious circumstances. Last week, a secondary facility in New Mexico was compromised. We believe a foreign intelligence operation is attempting to acquire the technology developed at these locations. Samuel's eyes narrowed. "And you think Riker's car trouble wasn't an accident?" "We can't rule out the possibility that his vehicle was deliberately disabled," Hayes confirmed. "The storm provided perfect cover for an interdiction operation designed to appear as a weather-related incident." Samuel's mind flashed back to the strange metal object he'd found among Riker's possessions. The metal disc. "It's connected to this research?" Director Hayes's expression tightened slightly. The object you recovered is a quantum encryption key. It's the only existing access mechanism for the secured research data. Without it, the information being transported is completely inaccessible, even to us. A key? Samuel asked. To what? To the future of global security, Hayes replied, her voice low and serious. The research Dr. Riker was transporting involves a technological breakthrough in quantum communication, a method of transmitting information that cannot be intercepted, corrupted, or decrypted by any known means. Whoever controls this technology could render all existing security protocols obsolete overnight. Samuel absorbed this information, his former military mindset automatically assessing strategic implications. And the unusual properties I noticed? The warmth, the interference with electronics? The key generates a localized quantum field that can disrupt conventional electronic systems, Hayes explained. Its thermal properties are a byproduct of the specialized materials used in its construction. Currently, fewer than 5 people in the government fully understand how it functions. As this explanation sank in, Samuel became aware of increased activity outside. Through the kitchen window, he could see security personnel moving with greater urgency, establishing defensive positions around the property perimeter. Director Hayes touched her earpiece, listening to an incoming communication. Her expression darkened as she received the information. Mr. Cooper, it appears your farm's isolation, which made it an ideal emergency shelter for Dr. Riker, may have just become a liability. Our perimeter sensors have detected approaching vehicles on the fire access road to the west, approximately 10 minutes out. That road's been closed for years, Samuel said, his body tensing automatically at the implied threat. Nobody local uses it, especially not during a blizzard. Exactly, Hayes replied, standing quickly, which strongly suggests our concerns about hostile interest in Dr. Riker and the encryption key were well-founded. She touched her earpiece again, issuing rapid commands to her security team. Samuel moved to the window, years of combat training automatically assessing tactical options. The approaching storm front had reduced visibility again, the brief morning clearing giving way to another wave of heavy snowfall. Somewhere out in that white void, moving through impossible conditions, were unknown forces approaching his family. Home with unknown intentions. How many people do you have here? He asked, military precision returning to his voice. 23 security personnel, including the helicopter crew, Hayes replied, noting his shift in demeanor. Standard presidential protection detail, not a combat unit. They're equipped for evacuation and defensive operations, not for repelling a coordinated assault. Samuel turned from the window, decision made. I know every inch of this property. There are defensive positions your people haven't found yet, access points they don't know about. I've got weapons and supplies cached in locations that don't appear on any map. Director Hayes studied him with new interest. Your file mentioned military service, but not special operations. Some records stay deliberately incomplete, Samuel replied without elaboration. I'll help you secure Riker and the key until reinforcements can arrive. This is my home, Director. I won't abandon it to whoever's coming through that blizzard. Director, Hayes activated her communication device, her demeanor shifting instantly from informational to operational. All units, condition yellow. Unknown vehicles approaching from the western access road. Establish defensive perimeter, priority protection for Lodestone. No engagement without direct authorization. She turned to Samuel, her expression grave. Mr. Cooper, we need to move Dr. Riker to a more secure location immediately. The guest house is too exposed if they've somehow obtained satellite imagery of the property. Samuel nodded, already mentally cataloguing his options. There's a storm cellar beneath the main barn, reinforced concrete, single access point, easy to defend. My grandfather converted it into a fallout shelter during the Cold War. It's not On any property records, Hayes studied him with renewed interest. How quickly can we relocate him? 10 minutes if we move now, before visibility drops further, Samuel replied, moving toward a locked cabinet in the kitchen. He entered a combination and retrieved a weathered case, opening it to reveal a Beretta M9, standard military issue, meticulously maintained. I'm assuming your people won't object to me carrying. Hayes shook her head. Under the circumstances, we'll take all the help we can get. She touched her earpiece again. Medical team, prepare Lodestone for immediate relocation. Security team, Alpha, coordinate with Mr. Cooper for fallback position. As Samuel checked his weapon with practiced efficiency, he noticed the director watching him closely. Former Rangers, I assume, she asked. Your file mentioned Afghanistan, but was notably light on specifics. 2 tours in Afghanistan, 1 in Iraq, Samuel confirmed, holstering the pistol. Specialized in rural interdiction operations. Ironic that I'm now on the receiving end. Before Hayes could respond, the house's lights flickered momentarily. Outside, several of the government vehicles experienced brief electrical malfunctions, their systems resetting. They're using EMP devices, Samuel observed, moving quickly to a wooden chest in the living room. Trying to disable your communications and surveillance. He retrieved additional equipment, a tactical vest, night vision monocular, and a small first aid kit. Local systems only, targeted pulses, military grade, not something civilians would have access to. Director Hayes's expression darkened. That confirms our suspicions about foreign state involvement. We need to assume they have detailed intelligence about the quantum key and possibly Dr. Riker's route. She turned to Samuel. Do you have any non-electronic communication methods? Available. They'll target our standard channels first. Samuel pulled an old metal box from beneath the floorboards near the fireplace. VHF radio set, analog equipment from the 80s, too basic to be affected by targeted EMP. My grandfather was paranoid about Russian invasions. Turns out he wasn't entirely wrong, just off by a few decades. As they prepared to move, 2 secret service agents entered the house, their expressions professionally neutral despite the escalating situation. Director, the medical team is ready to transport the package. Dr. Riker has regained consciousness, but remains disoriented. Has he said anything about the quantum key? Hayes asked sharply. Only that it must be synchronized before it can be used, the agent replied. He's asking for specific equipment we don't have on site. Samuel fastened his tactical vest, the familiar weight bringing back muscle memories from his military days. Let's focus on keeping him alive first. We can worry about synchronizing the key once we've secured a defensive position. Outside, the storm had intensified again, providing natural cover for their movement, but also limiting visibility for surveillance. Samuel led Hayes and the agents through a concealed path between outbuildings, using the massive snowdrifts as additional visual barriers. Duke padded silently ahead, his training as a support animal extending naturally to his current role as sentry. As they approached the main barn, Samuel noticed subtle signs of intrusion along the perimeter, disturbed snow patterns, and a partially disabled security camera. He signaled for the group to halt, pointing out the evidence to Hayes with military hand signals she recognized immediately. They're already inside the outer perimeter, he whispered, moving quietly, using the storm for cover, professional insertion team, not opportunistic locals. Hayes nodded grimly, relaying the information through her communication device using a preset code system. How much farther to the storm cellar? Northeast corner of the main barn, Samuel replied, indicating the red structure ahead. We'll need to move the hay bales concealing the entrance. Once inside, there's a reinforced door that would take shaped charges to breach. As they prepared to cross the final exposed area, the medical team emerged from the guest house with Dr. Riker on a transport stretcher, flanked by 4 heavily armed Secret Service agents. Even from a distance, Samuel could see the presidential advisor was conscious but weakened, his complexion pale against the dark winter gear they'd wrapped him in. The coordinated movement toward the barn proceeded with professional precision, the security teams maintaining overlapping fields of fire despite the challenging weather conditions. They had almost reached the structure when Duke suddenly froze, his ears perked forward, body rigid with alert tension. Samuel immediately signaled for everyone to take cover, recognizing his dog's behavior from countless patrols in Afghanistan. Seconds later, a barely perceptible whirring sound became audible above the howling wind. "Drone," Samuel whispered, pulling Hayes down behind a snowdrift. "Small, tactical model, probably thermal imaging capable." The security teams reacted instantly, deploying countermeasures from their equipment packs, specialized devices that created false heat signatures to confuse thermal imaging systems. The medical team accelerated their pace, rushing Dr. Riker through the barn's side entrance as the security perimeter tightened. Once inside the weathered structure, Samuel quickly directed them to the northeast corner where stacks of hay bales concealed a heavy metal door set into the concrete floor. Two agents moved the bales, while others established defensive positions at the barn's entrances. "Thermal blankets over Riker," Hayes ordered, as the medical team prepared to descend into the shelter. "Minimize his signature in case they penetrate the barn roof with advanced imaging." Samuel unlocked the heavy door, revealing a steep staircase, descending into darkness. "Generators at the bottom, left side. It's manually operated. No electronic ignition that could be affected by EMP devices." As the medical team carefully maneuvered Dr. Riker down the stairs, Hayes received an urgent communication through her earpiece. Her expression tightened as she processed the information. "Perimeter team reports 3 vehicles have stopped approximately 700 yards from the property line," she informed Samuel. "Personnel deploying on foot, moving in tactical formation through the tree line on the western boundary." "How many?" Samuel asked, helping the last agent down the stairs. "Initial count suggests 12 to 15 individuals," Hayes replied. "Heavily armed, using terrain for concealment. They're carrying equipment cases of unknown purpose." Samuel checked his weapon. Again, combat instincts fully engaged now. "With this visibility, they'll need to get within 200 yards to effectively target the buildings. That gives us some time." Once everyone was safely inside the storm cellar, Samuel sealed the heavy door and activated the manual generator, bringing dim lighting to the underground space. The shelter was surprisingly well equipped, stocked with preserved food, water, medical supplies, and even basic communications equipment. Dr. Riker had been placed on a cot against the far wall, the medical team administering fluids and monitoring his vital signs. Despite his weakened state, his eyes were alert, tracking movement across the shelter with intelligent assessment. "Mr. Cooper," Hayes said formally, "I'd like to introduce you to Dr. Alexander Riker, Special Advisor to the President of the United States." The man on the cot extended a shaking hand, which Samuel grasped firmly. "Thank you for your intervention, Mr. Cooper," Riker said, his voice stronger than his appearance suggested. "Your timing was providentially precise." "Just did what anyone would do," Samuel replied, though both men recognized the statement as the polite fiction it was. Riker's eyes held Samuel's with unusual intensity. "Did you bring it? The quantum key?" Samuel turned to Hayes, who nodded permission. He reached into his vest pocket and removed the small metallic disc, which now pulsed with subtle internal light that hadn't been visible before. "It's activating," Riker observed, struggling to sit up, "responding to proximity protocols. We have very little time before it reaches full operational status." "What happens then?" Samuel asked, feeling the device growing warmer in his palm. Riker exchanged a meaningful glance with Director Hayes before answering. Then our visitors will have no trouble finding us, Mr. Cooper. The key emits a quantum signature that becomes increasingly detectable as it approaches activation state. So it's a beacon, Samuel concluded, understanding dawning, and we've just brought it into our most secure location. Not exactly a beacon, Dr. Riker replied, his voice gaining strength as the medical team continued their treatment. More accurately, it's a quantum entanglement device that creates a highly specific energy signature. Under normal circumstances, it's completely undetectable. But in its current state, it's like a lighthouse in a storm. Hayes finished, her expression grim, and they have the technology to track it. Samuel placed the device on a metal table in the center of the shelter. Then we need to either shut it down or move it away from here. Riker shook his head weakly. Neither option is viable. The activation sequence has already begun. Attempting to interrupt it could trigger catastrophic quantum destabilization, and moving it now would only create a mobile target, potentially exposing more civilians to danger. Samuel studied the quantum key more carefully. The subtle pulsing had increased in frequency, and the markings on its surface now emitted a faint bluish glow. What exactly does this thing do, Dr. Riker? What makes it worth sending assault teams through a blizzard? Riker looked to Director Hayes, who gave a slight nod of authorization. The presidential advisor took a labored breath before speaking. 6 months ago, a theoretical physicist working at Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory made an accidental discovery while researching quantum computing applications. She found a method to create stable quantum entanglement between particles separated by unlimited distance, with instantaneous data transfer that cannot be intercepted or decoded by any conventional means. Samuel processed this information, recognizing the strategic implications immediately. Unbreakable, instantaneous communications across any distance. That's just the beginning, Riker continued. Subsequent testing revealed something far more significant. The entangled particles don't just transmit data, they can influence physical systems at the quantum level. In essence, we discovered a method to remotely affect electronic systems without any direct connection. Director Hayes interjected, her voice lowered despite the security of their location. The technology enables instantaneous, unblockable access to any digital system on Earth. Banking networks, power grids, defense systems, nuclear launch protocols, all potentially controllable through quantum manipulation. My God, Samuel whispered, understanding dawning. It's not just a key, it's the master key, Riker confirmed, to every lock on Earth. The quantum encryption key you recovered is the only existing control mechanism for the technology. Without it, the research is useless. The entanglement can't be directed or controlled. Samuel glanced at the device with newfound respect and apprehension. And you were transporting something this valuable by car during a blizzard? The storm provided optimal security conditions, Hayes explained. Conventional surveillance is severely degraded during extreme weather. We believed ground transport with minimal personnel would attract less attention than a military convoy or air transport. We were wrong, Riker added grimly. Someone leaked information about the transport. We suspect a foreign intelligence asset embedded in one of our research facilities. As the implications sank in, Samuel's tactical mind was already assessing their situation. These people outside, they're not just trying to steal research. If they get this key, they could potentially control or disable every critical system in the country. In the world, Riker corrected. This technology recognizes no borders. Quantum entanglement isn't limited by conventional physical constraints. Director Hayes checked her secure communication device, which displayed a property schematic with moving indicators representing her security teams. Our perimeter forces report the intruders have established positions on 3 sides of the property. They appear to be preparing specialized equipment. possibly signal amplifiers, to better locate the quantum signature. Samuel studied the display, recognizing the tactical approach pattern. They're setting up for a coordinated assault. Standard Special Forces protocol: establish containment perimeter, identify high-value target location, then execute precision. Extraction. How long until reinforcements arrive? He asked Hayes. The director's expression remained professionally neutral, but Samuel could read the concern behind her composure. The Presidential Security Response Team has been dispatched from Offutt Air Force Base, but the storm is hampering air operations. Estimated arrival time is 2 hours, assuming weather conditions don't deteriorate further. They'll move before then, Samuel concluded. Once their equipment is in place, they'll have a precise fix on our location. We need to prepare for immediate assault. Dr. Riker struggled to sit up more fully, wincing with the effort. There's another option. If I can complete the key's synchronization protocol, I can activate its defensive capabilities. What defensive capabilities? Samuel asked, glancing at the small device skeptically. The quantum key's primary function is control, but it also has protection mechanisms, Riker explained. When fully synchronized, it can generate a localized quantum field that disrupts all unauthorized electronic systems within a radius of approximately 300 meters. An elegant fail-safe, Hayes added. If anyone attempts to steal it, the key automatically disables their communication systems, weapons, surveillance equipment, anything with electronic components. Samuel considered this new information. How long to complete this synchronization? Under ideal conditions, 20 minutes, Riker replied. But I need specific equipment to interact with the key properly. The interface device was in my briefcase. Samuel turned to Hayes. The biometrically secured case I mentioned finding in his car. She nodded. Our teams retrieved it during the initial property search. It's currently secured in the command vehicle, which is parked directly in front of my house, Samuel observed. Likely under surveillance by now. He checked his weapon. Again, decision made. I'll retrieve it. That's a negative, Cooper, Hayes said firmly. You're a civilian. I can't authorize you to engage in what will likely become a combat situation. Samuel smiled thinly. With respect, Director, this is my property. Your authority ends where my front door begins. Besides, I know routes through this farm that don't appear on any satellite imagery or property maps. Before Hayes could object further, the communication system crackled with an urgent message from the security perimeter. Director, hostiles are deploying what appears to be a specialized EMP device. Our countermeasures are active, but may not fully mitigate. The transmission cut off abruptly, and several electronic systems in the shelter flickered momentarily. The quantum key's pulsations intensified in response, its surface now glowing with increasing brightness. They're mapping our electronic signature, Riker said urgently, using the EMP pulses to measure response patterns from the key. It's an advanced quantum detection methodology. How long before they pinpoint our location? Samuel asked, buckling on a utility belt from the shelter's emergency supplies. Minutes at most, Riker replied. The shelter's concrete may attenuate the signature somewhat, but once they calibrate their equipment... Hayes made a rapid decision, military pragmatism overriding protocol. Cooper, what's your proposed extraction route for the briefcase? Samuel moved to a faded map of the property hanging on the shelter wall. There's an irrigation tunnel that runs from the main barn to the equipment shed behind the house. It was installed by my grandfather to protect water lines from freezing. It's narrow and partially flooded this time of year, but navigable. I can approach the command vehicle from behind, minimizing exposure. Hayes studied the map, her tactical assessment matching his own. My people will create a diversion on the eastern perimeter. 2-minute window, synchronized with the next EMP. Pulse when their systems will be briefly recalibrating. I'll need Duke, Samuel added, checking the shelter's inventory for additional equipment. He can detect movement outside my visual range, and he's trained not to react audibly. The German shepherd perked up at the mention of his name, sensing the shift in energy and purpose in the room. Samuel knelt briefly beside his companion, checking the dog's protective vest and securing a specialized harness designed for tactical operations. "You've done this before," Hayes observed, watching the practiced efficiency of his preparations. "Different terrain, same principles," Samuel replied without elaboration. "I'll need 10 minutes to reach the tunnel entrance and assess the tactical situation topside." Director Hayes handed him a small communication device. Analog receiver, hardened against EMP, one-way transmission only. "We can send you updates on enemy positions, but you won't be able to respond without revealing your location." As Samuel completed his preparations, Dr. Riker called him over to the medical cot. The presidential advisor's color had improved slightly, though he still showed signs of his ordeal in the blizzard. "Cooper, there's something you should know." "Before you go," Riker said, his voice lowered to prevent the others from overhearing. "The quantum key is more than we've explained. Its capabilities extend beyond communication and systems access." Samuel paused, sensing the weight behind Riker's words. "What aren't you telling me, Doctor?" Riker glanced toward Hayes, who was coordinating with her remaining security forces, then back to Samuel. "The physicist who made the discovery, she theorized that the quantum entanglement process could potentially affect not just electronic systems, but any atomic structure, including biological matter." The implication hung in the air between them. "You're saying this technology could be weaponized against people," Samuel concluded quietly. "Theoretical only at this stage," Riker emphasized. "But yes, the research suggests quantum-level manipulation of biological systems might be possible in the wrong hands. A weapon that could target specific individuals anywhere on the planet with no defense and no warning," Samuel finished. "No wonder half the world's intelligence agencies would kill to get it." Riker gripped Samuel's arm with surprising strength. "The briefcase contains more than just the synchronization equipment. It has a fail-safe destruct mechanism. If retrieval becomes impossible, the authorization code is 7729 Alpha Tango Echo. It will render both the briefcase contents and the quantum key permanently inoperable." Samuel nodded grimly, committing the code to memory. "Last resort only." "Understood." As he prepared to leave the shelter, Director Hayes approached with final instructions. "The diversion begins in 12 minutes. Standard operating procedure would be to extract both the key and Dr. Riker if the shelter is compromised. We need to assume the hostiles have similar tactical training to yourself." "Then we'll change the equation," Samuel replied, checking the analog timepiece he'd strapped to his wrist. "Duke and I will be topside in 10 minutes, ready for your diversion." Hayes studied him with professional assessment. "Good hunting, Cooper. There's more at stake here than you know." Samuel patted Duke's head, a signal for the dog to stay close and alert. "More than quantum keys and presidential advisors, you mean?" "Much more," Hayes replied cryptically. "Complete this mission successfully, and we'll have a longer conversation about why your farm's location might not be entirely coincidental to these events." Before Samuel could press for clarification, she turned, a way to coordinate the diversion with her remaining security forces. Left with this cryptic suggestion, Samuel led Duke toward the shelter's secondary exit, a narrow maintenance shaft that would give them covert access to the irrigation tunnel system. As they prepared to ascend, Samuel glanced back at the quantum key, still pulsing with increasing intensity on the metal table. Whatever secrets it contained, whatever capabilities it might unlock, one thing was certain: the tranquil isolation of Cooper Farm had been permanently shattered, along with the boundaries of what Samuel believed possible in the world. The maintenance Shaft was exactly as cramped as Samuel remembered from his childhood explorations, barely wide enough for his shoulders, with rusted metal rungs embedded in concrete that had deteriorated over decades of Nebraska's freeze-thaw cycles. Duke climbed ahead of him with the nimble confidence of a working dog, his training allowing him to navigate the unfamiliar terrain without hesitation. As they ascended, Samuel's mind processed Director Hayes's cryptic suggestion about his farm's location. The Cooper property had been in his family for generations, chosen by his great-grandfather for its water access and favorable soil composition. The idea that there might be another reason, something significant enough to be relevant to national security, seemed implausible. Yet the events of the past 12 hours had repeatedly redefined his understanding of what was plausible. The shaft terminated in a narrow utility room adjacent to the main barn's northern wall. Samuel eased the access panel open carefully, using his tactical mirror to check for movement before emerging. The barn appeared empty, though the howling wind made audio detection unreliable. He signaled Duke forward with a hand gesture, watching. As the German Shepherd moved in a practiced search pattern, checking corners and potential hiding spots. When Duke returned without alerting, Samuel pulled himself out of the shaft and quickly oriented himself. The irrigation tunnel entrance was concealed behind a false wall panel in the equipment storage area, approximately 30 feet away. Moving silently, despite the bulky winter gear, he navigated through the shadowy interior of the barn, every sense heightened by the familiar tension of impending conflict. The communication device from Hayes vibrated against his chest, a silent notification. Samuel checked the small display. Hostile forces deploying technical equipment 300 m west and north. East approach appears clear. Diversion in 8 minutes. Samuel reached the false panel and removed it, revealing the narrow opening of the irrigation tunnel. Originally designed to accommodate maintenance workers inspecting the water lines, the passage was approximately 3 feet in diameter, large enough to crawl through, though not comfortably. More concerning was the several inches of icy water, now visible at the bottom of the tunnel, a result of the recent thaw freeze cycles. He checked his waterproof gear and signaled Duke to enter first. The dog obeyed instantly, splashing into the dark tunnel with silent efficiency. Samuel followed, pulling the panel closed behind him and activating his red-filtered tactical flashlight to minimize visible signature. The tunnel stretched approximately 200 yards, connecting the main barn to the equipment shed behind the farmhouse. The frigid water soaked through Samuel's pants despite the waterproofing, the biting cold, a constant reminder of how quickly hypothermia could become a factor in this environment. Halfway through the tunnel, the communication device vibrated again. Hostile team moving toward barn. 3 operators, heavily armed, appears to be reconnaissance element. Samuel increased his pace, pushing through the discomfort. If the hostiles discovered the storm cellar, Hayes and her team would be cornered with limited escape options. The retrieval of the briefcase had transformed from important to urgent. The tunnel eventually opened into a small concrete chamber beneath the equipment shed. Samuel emerged cautiously, using his tactical mirror again to survey the space above through the access grate. The shed appeared empty, though he could hear faint movements outside, boots crunching on snow, the metallic sounds of equipment being positioned. He checked his watch. 3 minutes until the planned diversion. Samuel used the time to assess his approach to the command vehicle. The equipment shed sat approximately 50 yards behind the farmhouse, with a direct line of sight to the front drive where the government vehicles were parked. However, that approach would leave him completely exposed if hostile forces had established surveillance on the area. The alternative was to use the drainage ditch that ran along the eastern property line, a deeper-than-usual feature designed to handle the spring melt from the higher elevation fields. The ditch would provide cover, but would add precious minutes to his approach. Before he could decide, Duke suddenly tensed, his attention fixed on the shed door. Seconds later, Samuel heard the distinctive crunch of approaching footsteps. Someone was coming. He quickly retreated to the access grate, preparing to drop back into the tunnel if necessary. Duke positioned himself in a defensive stance, waiting for commands but making no sound. The footsteps stopped directly outside the shed door, followed by the crackle of a radio transmission. "Eastern Quadrant secure," a voice reported in accented English. "Eastern European," Samuel guessed, possibly Russian. "Moving to check out buildings now." "Proceed with caution," replied another voice through the radio. "Thermal imaging shows multiple heat signatures in the main residence area. Primary target signature is faint but appears to be below ground level, possibly a basement or shelter." Samuel's jaw tightened. Their equipment was already cutting through the shelter's protection. The timeline had just compressed significantly. The shed door creaked open, allowing a blast of cold air to sweep through the space. Samuel remained motionless in the shadows as a figure entered. Tall, heavily equipped with tactical gear that didn't bear any national or organizational insignia. The man moved with professional precision, sweeping a compact weapon in practiced arcs as he checked corners and potential hiding places. Samuel recognized the methodology immediately. Spetsnaz trained, or perhaps one of the Eastern European Special Forces units that had adopted similar protocols. The operator's equipment was cutting-edge, next-generation night vision, specialized communications gear, and a weapon that Samuel identified as a suppressed VSS Vintores, a Russian special operations rifle designed specifically for silent operations. The intruder continued his methodical search of the shed, moving inexorably closer to the access grate where Samuel and Duke remained concealed. Discovery seemed inevitable until a sudden explosion rocked the eastern perimeter of the property. Hayes's diversion occurring 2 minutes ahead of schedule. The operator immediately redirected his attention, speaking rapidly into his communication system in Russian. Samuel caught enough of the language to understand they were redirecting forces to respond to the perceived threat. As the intruder moved toward the door, Samuel made a split-second decision. The operator's equipment and intelligence would be valuable, and eliminating one member of the hostile force would improve their odds. With practiced silence, he emerged from the access grate behind the Russian, Duke moving in perfect coordination to block any potential escape route. The ensuing struggle was brief and silent. Samuel's Rangers training proved decisive against even the highly skilled operative. Within seconds, he had subdued the man using a specialized chokehold designed to render opponents unconscious without permanent injury. As the Russian slumped to the floor, Samuel quickly secured him with zip ties from his tactical vest and appropriated the man's communications equipment. The operator's radio immediately provided valuable intelligence as it continued to receive transmissions from the hostile force. Samuel listened intently, his Russian rusty but serviceable, team leader to all units. American security forces have triggered explosives on the eastern boundary. This appears to be a diversion. Maintain focus on the quantum signature. Triangulation confirms the target is located beneath the main barn structure. Assault team, prepare. For breach, technical team continue signal amplification. Through the shed window, Samuel could see increased activity around the property as black-clad figures moved with tactical precision toward the eastern disturbance. However, a separate group was clearly advancing on the barn, heading directly for the storm cellar where Hayes, Riker, and the quantum key were located. The communication device from Hayes vibrated again. Hostiles identified source. Approaching. Shelter position. Estimate 7 minutes to breach attempt. Primary assault team, 5 operators. Secondary teams distracted by diversion. Samuel checked his watch and made rapid calculations. The command vehicle was now less guarded due to the diversion, but the shelter would be under direct threat within minutes. He needed to retrieve the briefcase and return before the hostiles breached the cellar, a nearly impossible timeline. As he prepared to move, the unconscious Russian's separate personal device activated. A voice spoke in clear, unaccented English, a voice that conveyed absolute authority. Status report, Alexei. Has the quantum signature been precisely located? When no answer came, the voice continued after a brief pause. All team leaders be advised. American forces may have neutralized Alexei. Accelerate the timeline. We need the quantum key secured within 10 minutes before their reinforcements arrive. Use whatever force is necessary. The package must be recovered intact. Samuel stared at the device, realizing he was hearing the voice of whoever was coordinating this highly sophisticated operation. The accent, the precision of language, the calm authority, all suggested someone accustomed to command, not a field operative, but the mission controller. Once the key is secured, the voice continued, proceed with secondary objective. The witness elimination protocol is authorized for all occupants of the property. The cold calculation in those words eliminated any remaining doubt about the stakes. This wasn't just about technology theft. Everyone at Cooper Farm had been marked for death to eliminate witnesses. Samuel removed the Russian operative's tactical gear, quickly incorporating useful elements into his own equipment. The night vision system was superior to anything he'd used before, and the communication device would allow him to monitor the hostiles' movements and coordination. With renewed urgency, he signaled Duke toward the shed door. The diversion was still drawing attention, but the window of opportunity was rapidly closing. Samuel had to reach the command vehicle, retrieve the briefcase, and return to the storm cellar before the assault team breached their position. As he prepared to emerge from the shed, Samuel caught the first glimpse of the operation's apparent leader, a tall figure in distinctive winter gear, observing the farm from the tree line through high-powered optics. Even at this distance, the man's bearing conveyed military precision and complete confidence. This was someone accustomed to success in high-risk operations, someone who had planned and executed similar missions many times before. Samuel felt a chill that had nothing to do with the winter storm. He recognized the methodology, the precision, the ruthless efficiency of the operation. Whatever government or organization had sent this team, they had deployed their elite assets, professionals, who would not be easily outmaneuvered or deterred. The mission to retrieve the briefcase had just become significantly more complex, and the consequences of failure had escalated from national security breach to immediate personal survival. Samuel moved through the swirling snow toward the command vehicle. Fragments of his military past surfaced with unexpected clarity. The familiar tension of combat operations, the heightened awareness of surroundings, all returned as if he'd never left the Rangers. Staff Sergeant Samuel Cooper had served with the 75th Ranger Regiment, 2nd Battalion, specializing in high-risk extraction operations in hostile territory. His skills had made him valuable for missions that required moving critical assets through enemy-controlled regions with minimal support. 3 missions had shaped his approach to combat operations. In eastern Afghanistan, he had extracted an intelligence asset from a Taliban-controlled village after their primary extraction plan was compromised. Near the Syrian border, his team had recovered sensitive equipment from a downed reconnaissance aircraft without air support due to diplomatic complications. But it was the 3rd mission that had ultimately led to his return to civilian life. A high-priority extraction in northern Iraq had gone catastrophically wrong when intelligence proved faulty. Samuel's team had walked into a prepared ambush. 3 of his men died in the initial contact. Despite being wounded, Samuel had managed to extract the remaining team members, making tactical decisions that ultimately saved lives, but left him with both physical and psychological scars. The military had awarded him the Silver Star, but Samuel had been unable to reconcile himself to the loss of his teammates. After rehabilitation, he declined a promotion and returned to Nebraska when his father's health declined. Now his combat instincts served him well. He recognized the hostile forces' deployment pattern, a variation on standard Spetsnaz doctrine. For rural target isolation, their movements suggested experienced operators working with excellent intelligence on the property layout. The communication device from Hayes vibrated. Hostiles breaching barn interior. Estimate 4 minutes to shelter discovery. Samuel checked his position relative to the command vehicle. Direct approach would be impossible without being spotted. He needed another diversion, something to draw attention away momentarily. Before he could implement a plan, the Russian communication device activated. All units be advised. Command has confirmed the survival priority list. The quantum key is primary objective. Dr. Riker is secondary. His biometric data is necessary for authentication. All other witnesses are expendable. Samuel's window was closing rapidly. They had detected his movement despite his precautions. He signaled Duke to remain close, then shifted to a more aggressive timeline. As he prepared to move, an unexpected memory surfaced, something his grandfather had told him years ago while installing the irrigation system. They had uncovered an unusual concrete structure that didn't match any of the original farm blueprints. "This land has secrets, Samuel," his grandfather had said cryptically. "During the war, the government used this property for something they never fully explained to your great-grandfather. They paid him well for his silence, helped establish this farm when so many others were failing, but they left things behind, things they thought were safely buried." Hayes's earlier comment about the property's location not being coincidental suddenly connected with this memory in a new and troubling way. What if the Cooper farm's strategic value wasn't a recent discovery? What if his family's land had been selected generations ago for reasons connected to whatever secret Riker was now protecting? Samuel made his decision in seconds. The suspicious device on the briefcase demanded caution, but the firefight intensifying at the barn meant Hayes and Riker were out of time. He carefully placed the briefcase in the snow several yards from the vehicle, then wrapped his jacket around it, basic blast containment if the device was explosive. Duke remained vigilant as Samuel extracted the folder about Cooper Farm, securing it inside his tactical vest. Whatever secrets his family's land held, that information might prove critical in the coming minutes. The Russian communication device crackled. "Breach team has entered the shelter. Resistance encountered. Security. Personnel approximately 5 agents. No sign of primary package yet." Samuel needed to return immediately. Using the distraction of the main assault, he began moving toward the barn, keeping to shadows and using snowdrifts for cover. He had almost reached the irrigation tunnel entrance when 3 armed figures emerged from behind the equipment shed, cutting off his escape route. "Target acquired," one of them reported in Russian. "Cooper and K9 moving toward barn." Samuel ducked behind a tractor as automatic weapons fire erupted, rounds impacting the snow around him. Duke pressed against his leg, trained to stay close in combat situations. They were pinned down, cut off from both the briefcase and the storm shelter. In that moment of crisis, Samuel noticed something he'd overlooked before: a subtle depression in the ground near the equipment shed's foundation, barely visible beneath the snow. Recognition dawned immediately. During his childhood explorations, he discovered an access hatch his grandfather had shown him for emergencies only. If the government documents were accurate about an installation beneath the farm, that hatch might connect to whatever lay below the barn, possibly offering direct access to the storm shelter where Hayes and Riker were fighting for their lives. The decision was made for him as additional hostile forces converged on his position. Samuel signaled Duke with a hand command, and together they sprinted toward the equipment shed under covering fire from Hayes's remaining security team at the barn. Bullets tore through the air around them as Samuel reached the depression in the snow, frantically clearing it to reveal a metal access panel, rusted but intact. The manual release mechanism was concealed beneath a false electrical junction box. The panel opened with a protest of decades-old hinges, revealing a narrow vertical shaft with metal rungs descending into darkness. Samuel urged Duke in first, then followed quickly, pulling the hatch closed above him just as hostile forces reached his previous position. The shaft descended approximately 30 feet before opening into a concrete tunnel, far more sophisticated than the irrigation passages he'd used earlier. The walls bore faded government markings and security designations. This was no agricultural infrastructure. This was military construction. Samuel activated his tactical light, revealing a tunnel that extended in the direction of the barn. The passage showed signs of age, but remained structurally sound. Decades-old electrical conduits ran along the ceiling, and faded evacuation markers pointed toward what the signage identified as Site Alpha Main Chamber. As he moved through this unexpected passage, the sounds of the firefight above became muffled but still audible. Hayes's team was clearly losing ground to superior numbers and positioning. Without the briefcase and its synchronization equipment, their options were rapidly diminishing. Samuel increased his pace, following the tunnel as it curved beneath his property. Whatever Site Alpha had been, it might now represent their only remaining tactical advantage in a rapidly deteriorating situation. The tunnel widened as Samuel advanced, eventually opening into a circular chamber approximately 30 feet in diameter. The space contained abandoned equipment covered in protective tarps, workstations with antiquated technology, and walls lined with specialized shielding material. Faded labels identified various systems: quantum field generator, stabilization array, and monitoring station Alpha. Most significantly, a reinforced door on the far wall bore the label Emergency Access Storm Shelter, confirming Samuel's hope that this facility connected directly to where Hayes and Riker were making their stand. As he approached the door, Samuel noticed something unexpected: subtle illumination coming from several equipment panels that should have been dormant for decades. Closer inspection revealed that certain systems appeared to have been recently reactivated, with modern components integrated into the original infrastructure. Someone had been secretly upgrading Site Alpha. The Russian communication device intercepted another transmission. Breach team reports heavy resistance from shelter. American security using tunnel system for tactical advantage. No confirmation on package location yet. Volkov ordering second team to deploy EMP device to disable electronic security measures. Samuel's tactical assessment crystallized instantly. The storm shelter where he'd left Hayes and Riker wasn't just a Cold War relic. It was an access point to whatever classified installation had been hidden beneath Cooper Farm for generations. The Russians were fighting to secure not just the quantum key, but potentially the entire facility. The situation called for immediate action. Samuel approached the emergency access door, finding it secured with both a mechanical lock and what appeared to be a biometric reader, though the latter showed no signs of power. The mechanical lock would require either the correct combination or physical breach. Duke suddenly alerted, turning toward a previously unnoticed access panel near the floor. The panel had been displaced slightly, revealing another passage, one that showed signs of recent use. Samuel made his decision. The documents mentioned his grandfather having partial clearance for maintenance. On a hunch, he examined the mechanical lock more carefully, noting that it was a standard military model from the 1960s. These typically used a fallback access code for emergency maintenance, often derived from the installation date. The documents had mentioned 1967 as when the second-generation Stabilization technology was installed. Samuel tried the numeric combination 1967. Nothing happened. He recalibrated, thinking like a military security designer. Installation dates in secure facilities were often recorded by day and month rather than year for precisely this reason. The document hadn't specified an exact date, but Samuel recalled his grandfather's birthday was September 16th, a date the old man had once cryptically referred to as doubly significant. Samuel entered 0 to 916. The lock disengaged with a heavy, mechanical thunk. Decades-old emergency systems activated. Hydraulic assists helping to swing open the reinforced door despite years of disuse. Beyond lay a narrow passage that connected directly to the storm shelter, where the sounds of conflict were now clearly audible. Through a ventilation grate, Samuel could see Hayes and 3 remaining security personnel had established a defensive position around Dr. Riker, who was hunched protectively over the quantum key. They were pinned down by hostile forces at the main entrance. Samuel needed to create another entry point to change the tactical equation. Returning briefly to the main chamber, he examined the recently upgraded equipment. 1 active monitor displayed a comprehensive schematic of Site Alpha, revealing that the installation was far more extensive than he'd imagined. Most importantly, the schematic showed a secondary emergency exit that connected to the storm drain system approximately 50 yards east of the barn. Samuel formulated his plan rapidly, drawing on years of special operations experience. He would create a 3-phase response. First, surprise the hostile forces with an attack from their flank using the hidden access. Second, secure Riker and the quantum key. Third, evacuate through the secondary emergency exit to reach a defensive position where they could await reinforcements. The document reference to natural quantum stabilization field suddenly took on new significance. If Cooper Farm had been selected for its unusual properties related to quantum phenomena, the installation might contain equipment that could interact with the key directly. With grim determination, Samuel prepared to enter the storm shelter and confront the hostile forces that had invaded his family's property. The fate of the quantum key, and potentially much more, now depended on his ability to turn the tactical situation in their favor. Samuel positioned himself at the emergency access door, timing his entry to coincide with gunfire to mask the sound. When the Russians fired another volley, he swung the door open and entered the storm shelter from an unexpected angle. The scene was chaos. Hostile operators maintaining fire from the main entrance, while Hayes and her remaining team sheltered. Behind overturned equipment, Dr. Riker was huddled behind cover, the quantum key clutched protectively against his chest. Its pulsations had intensified, now emitting visible light that cast eerie shadows. Samuel moved with Ranger precision, neutralizing the nearest hostile with a perfectly placed shot before the man registered his presence. The attack, from an unexpected direction, created momentary confusion among the Russian team. "Cooper!" Hayes shouted over the gunfire. "Secure Riker!" Samuel advanced, firing accurately to keep the remaining hostiles pinned down. Hayes and her team coordinated their movements, with his years of training evident in their seamless response. One of the Russians shouted into his radio, "Flanking attack! Unknown entry point, request immediate backup." Samuel reached Riker, who looked up urgently. "The briefcase." "Compromised," Samuel replied. "Possible explosive device attached." Riker's face fell. "Without the synchronization equipment, we can't activate the key's defensive protocols." "I found something else," Samuel said. "There's an entire facility beneath my farm, Site Alpha, recently reactivated." Recognition flashed across Riker's face. "Of course! That's why the key's readings have been unusual here, the quantum field stabilization technology." A deafening explosion rocked the shelter as the Russians deployed a breaching charge. Concrete dust filled the air as chunks of the ceiling collapsed. partially blocking the entrance but creating new entry angles. "We need to move now," Samuel ordered. "There's another way out, through the old facility." Hayes nodded grimly, directing her team to establish a withdrawal formation. Samuel led Riker toward the emergency access door. "The installation has a secondary exit that connects to the storm drainage system. If we reach it, we might evacuate to a defensible position." As they reached the door, Duke's alert bark signaled new danger. Samuel pushed Riker through just as gunfire erupted from the other side. Hostile forces had discovered the secondary access point. They were trapped between two advancing enemy teams with limited ammunition and no reinforcements. "Hayes," he called out. "We're cut off from both exits." The director reached them, blood streaming from a wound on her forehead. "Options, Cooper?" Samuel indicated the facility schematic. "The main chamber contains equipment that might interact with the key." "Riker, could the quantum technology in this facility substitute for the synchronization equipment?" Riker studied the key thoughtfully. "Theoretically, yes. If this facility was designed to work with similar technology, there might be compatible interfaces. But activating decades-old systems without proper protocols is extremely risky. More risky than our current situation," Samuel asked grimly. Riker's expression hardened with resolve. "Lead the way, Mr. Cooper. I believe it's time to see exactly what your family has been safeguarding all these years." Samuel led the group into Site Alpha's main chamber, securing the emergency access door behind them. Hayes positioned her remaining security personnel to defend both entry points, while Samuel guided Riker toward the recently reactivated equipment. "This technology was installed during the Cold War," Samuel explained. "According to the documents I found, Cooper Farm sits on a natural quantum stabilization field." Riker approached the equipment with reverent caution, the quantum key pulsing intensely as he moved toward the central console. "This is extraordinary," he murmured. "These are early-generation quantum field manipulators, predecessors to the technology we developed." "Can you use it?" Hayes asked urgently, checking her weapon as sounds of hostiles grew louder. Riker placed the quantum key on a specialized interface panel, a circular depression that matched the device perfectly. The response was immediate and dramatic. The key's pulsations synchronized with lights across the control systems, and dormant displays flickered to life throughout the chamber. "The compatibility is remarkable," Riker said, fingers moving across controls. "It's as if the modern technology was directly derived from these original systems." "That's because it was," came a new voice from the chamber entrance. Samuel turned to find himself facing Volkov, the operation commander, flanked by two operators. Most shocking, however, was that Director Hayes made no move to engage them, instead lowering her weapon slowly. "Catherine," Riker said, his voice flat with realization. "You knew." "I've been aware of Site Alpha's significance for some time," Hayes replied, "just as I've been aware of the limitations in your official research." "You're working with them," Samuel demanded, keeping his weapon raised. "It's more complicated than that," Hayes replied. "There are no simple enemies or allies. When it comes to technology of this magnitude," Volkov stepped further into the chamber. "What Director Hayes is trying to explain is that certain advancements transcend national interests. The quantum technology requires international cooperation." "Cooperation? Is that what you call an armed assault on American soil?" Samuel asked. A regrettable necessity," Volkov answered smoothly. "Dr. Riker has been unwilling to acknowledge that this technology cannot be controlled by a single government." The quantum key's pulsations had reached a crescendo, its light forming intricate patterns that interacted with the chamber's equipment. Energy fields became visible throughout the space. "You don't understand what you've discovered," Hayes said to Riker. "This installation proves what we've suspected. The quantum field technology existed before any of our research. Your breakthrough wasn't creation, it was rediscovery. The synchronization is nearly complete, Riker announced, focused on the equipment despite the weapons trained on him. Cooper Farm's unique properties are amplifying the key's capabilities beyond anything we've achieved in our laboratories. Samuel caught Hayes and Volkov exchanging a meaningful glance, confirmation that their alliance was real. This installation wasn't just monitoring quantum fields, Hayes explained. It was built directly above something much older, something discovered during the initial excavation in 1952, Volkov nodded. What your government classified as a natural quantum stabilization field is actually an artifact of non-human origin, Mr. Cooper. Your family's land contains technology that predates human civilization. The revelation struck Samuel with stunning force. The strange properties of his family's land, his grandfather's cryptic comments, the decades of mysterious maintenance work, all connected to something literally unearthly buried beneath the generations-old farm. 3 days later, Samuel stood on his front porch, watching as the last government vehicles departed his property. The farm appeared unchanged. Snow-covered fields, weathered outbuildings, the old farmhouse with smoke curling from its chimney. Yet everything had fundamentally transformed. The confrontation in Site Alpha had ended not with violence, but with revelation. The quantum key's integration with the ancient technology had triggered a system-wide reactivation, generating holographic displays and activating communication systems dormant for decades. As the facility came fully online, it had identified Samuel by name as fourth-generation observer and recognized his genetic signature. In those critical moments, presidential security forces had arrived, establishing a perimeter and detaining the remaining Russian operatives. The diplomatic significance of what lay beneath Cooper Farm had superseded the immediate tactical situation, forcing Hayes, Volkov, and Riker to negotiate rather than fight. Duke rested at Samuel's feet as Dr. Riker approached from the guest house, carrying a diplomatic pouch containing new documents, revised agreements between the Cooper family and multiple government agencies. "The President sends his personal thanks," Riker said, handing over the sealed documents, "and his assurance that your role as caretaker will be fully respected moving forward." Samuel accepted the package with mixed emotions. "And the international situation?" "Director Hayes is leading negotiations with representatives from several countries," Riker replied. Volkov's approach was unacceptable, but his concern about unilateral control wasn't entirely without merit. The quantum key, now permanently integrated with the ancient system, had been designated a shared human resource under multilateral oversight, with Cooper Farm maintaining its status as the primary installation and Samuel granted authority that superseded any single government's control. "Your family has been safeguarding something of incalculable importance for generations," Riker continued. "Now that its true nature has been revealed, that responsibility becomes both clearer and more complex." Samuel gazed across the snow-covered fields. The property that had seemed like a financial burden now represented something far more significant, a cosmic trust, a connection to technology that predated human civilization. "My grandfather used to say this land chose us as much as we chose it," Samuel said quietly. "I never understood what he meant until now." The quantum field influence explained many farm mysteries, the unusually abundant crops, resilient livestock, and favorable weather patterns within the property boundaries. These Cooper luck phenomena that neighbors had remarked upon for generations suddenly had extraordinary scientific explanation. "The mortgage has been resolved," Riker added. "The government has established a permanent trust to maintain Cooper Farm in perpetuity." As Riker returned to the guest house, Samuel remained on the porch, watching the winter sun begin its descent. Duke pressed against his leg, a warm, familiar presence amidst a world transformed by revelation. He was still a farmer, though now he understood that what his family had been cultivating went far beyond crops and livestock. They had been tending to something ancient and profound, a responsibility passed down through generations of Coopers who had somehow sensed the importance of their stewardship even without fully comprehending its nature. As darkness fell over the Nebraska plains, Samuel Cooper returned to his farmhouse, ready to embrace both the weight and wonder of his newly understood inheritance, caretaker of a legacy that connected the distant past to whatever future might unfold beneath the quiet fields of Cooper Farm. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.